On Christmas Eve, Millionaire disguises himself as a customer to test his employees. But he didn't expect to be treated this way. Thomas Carrington had always considered himself a man of ambition. Winning the lottery had been a stroke of unimaginable luck that transformed his life overnight. Once an unassuming accountant with modest dreams, he became a multimillionaire almost too quickly to process. And with the kind of fortune that could buy just about anything, Thomas decided to pursue the one dream that had followed him since childhood, opening a toy store. The store, Christmas Delights, stood in the heart of the city, a beacon of nostalgia and whimsy. It was everything Thomas had imagined it would be: shelves lined with intricate dolls, gleaming train sets, and plush animals waiting to be hugged. For Thomas, this wasn't just a business. It was a tribute to his younger self, a sanctuary for families to create magical moments. But lately, that magic seemed to be slipping through his fingers. Sitting in his office, Thomas scrolled through his phone, reading yet another series of damning online reviews. Terrible service. Staff are rude and unhelpful. Don't waste your time here. Each comment felt like a personal blow. His fists clenched as he reread one particular review. I tried to get help finding a gift for my son, but the employees acted like I didn't exist. Never coming back. Thomas sighed deeply and leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. This couldn't be happening. Not to his dream. The next morning, determined to address the situation head-on, he called a staff meeting in the break room. The employees gathered, some with curious expressions, others visibly uneasy. Thomas entered with his phone in hand, the tension in the air palpable. He wasted no time. I've been reading the reviews, he began, his voice steady but cold. And I'm not happy with what I'm seeing. He turned the screen toward them, the glaring comments displayed for all to see. Care to explain why my store is being called the worst shopping experience in town? The staff exchanged nervous glances. Finally, Susan, the store manager, stepped forward. Mr. Carrington, these reviews don't reflect what's really happening here, she said, her tone calm but defensive. We've always provided excellent customer service. Maybe these complaints are, I don't know, fake. Fake. Thomas raised an eyebrow, his skepticism clear. Why would anyone fake this? Competition, Rick, one of the younger sales associates, interjected. He leaned against the wall with a shrug. It happens all the time. Someone's probably jealous of how well we're doing and decided to tarnish our reputation. Jealousy doesn't write detailed accounts of bad service, Thomas shot back. These people aren't vague. They're describing specific interactions, unhelpful staff, rude attitudes. Are you telling me they're just making it up? Susan hesitated. I don't know. But I assure you, our team is doing its best. Maybe it's just people being overly critical. You know how social media can be. Thomas scanned their faces, searching for cracks in their composure. He wanted to believe them, but a gnawing doubt crept in. Something felt off. All right, he said finally, his tone sharp. I'll take your word for now. But I'll be watching. If there's any truth to these complaints, I'll find out. The meeting ended with a heavy silence, and the staff dispersed, whispering among themselves. That evening, over a quiet dinner, Thomas shared his frustration with his wife, Evelyn. They say everything's fine, he said, pushing his plate aside. But it's not. I can feel it. Evelyn, ever poised, swirled the wine in her glass before responding. Thomas, I warned you about this, she said, her voice tinged with exasperation. You didn't need to open that store. He frowned. Evelyn, this isn't about money. You know that. Exactly, she retorted. You don't need the stress. We have more money than we could ever spend. Why not sell the store and focus on something easier? Thomas leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. This isn't just some business venture to me. It's my dream. Selling it isn't an option. Then it's your problem, Evelyn said flatly, rising from her chair. Good luck with it. As she left the room, Thomas sat alone, staring at the untouched food on his plate. Evelyn's indifference cut deeper than the negative reviews. For the first time, a thought took root in his mind. What if the problem wasn't just bad service? What if something else was happening? His fingers tightened around his phone as a plan began to form. If no one would tell him the truth, he'd find it himself. Thomas tossed and turned all night, consumed by the thought that he was being deceived. If his employees weren't being honest, he would find out for himself. That resolve solidified into a plan just as the first rays of dawn broke. He would go undercover. Early the next morning, Thomas dressed in a way that he hoped would make him unrecognizable. Faded jeans, a worn hoodie, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face replaced his usual tailored suits. He checked his reflection in the mirror. Simple. Unassuming. He hardly recognized himself. Arriving at Christmas Delights before opening hours, he slipped in with a small group of early customers. No one gave him a second glance, and he felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. For the first half hour, he wandered through the store as if he were an ordinary shopper. He carefully observed his employees from a distance, making mental notes of their behavior. Rick was the first to catch his attention. The young man was standing at the cash register, phone in hand, his thumbs flying across the screen. A line of 2 customers formed at the counter, their polite coughs going ignored. Thomas picked up a small, brightly colored puzzle box from a nearby display and approached the counter. "Excuse me," Thomas said, keeping his voice even and his eyes lowered. "Can you help me with this? I'm trying to figure out if it's age-appropriate for my niece." Rick glanced up from his phone, barely looking at Thomas before rolling his eyes. "Everything you need to know is on the box," Rick muttered, his tone dripping with annoyance. "Just read it." Thomas felt his blood pressure spike, but forced himself to stay calm. "Well," Thomas said, holding the box up, "I can't find the age recommendation anywhere. Maybe I'm missing it." Rick groaned audibly and snatched the box from Thomas's hands. He gave it a cursory glance, jabbed a finger at a corner of the packaging, and thrust it back toward him. "Right there. 3 and up. Happy." Thomas clenched his jaw, biting back a retort. He thanked Rick curtly and walked away. In another aisle, Thomas noticed Susan, the store manager, speaking with a woman and her young son. The woman seemed unsure, holding up 2 different board games and asking questions. "I'm just not sure which one he'll like better," the woman said, her tone apologetic. "Do you have any recommendations?" Susan let out a sharp sigh. "Ma'am, I don't know your kid. Just pick the one that looks more fun to you." The boy tugged on his mother's sleeve. "I like this one," he whispered, pointing to one of the games. The mother hesitated, turning to Susan again. "But is it popular? I just want to make sure he'll really enjoy it." Susan folded her arms and looked at her watch. "Look, it's a game. If he doesn't like it, bring it back. Simple as that." The woman's face fell. "Oh, okay," she said softly, putting one of the games back on the shelf. As Susan turned to leave, Thomas stepped closer and caught the defeated expression on the mother's face. It hit him like a punch to the gut. Thomas spent the next several hours observing similar interactions. Employees ignored customers or spoke to them with visible irritation. Customers left empty-handed or with complaints muttered under their breath. It was a far cry from the warm, inviting atmosphere he had dreamed of when he opened the store. Just as he was about to call it a day, something unusual caught his attention. From his vantage point near the back of the store, he saw Evelyn entering through the side door. She wasn't dressed as if she were there to shop. She moved quickly, glancing around as though trying to avoid being seen. Thomas felt his stomach twist. What is she doing here? He followed her, careful to keep his distance. She made her way to the employees-only section at the back of the store. Thomas hesitated for a moment, then quietly slipped through the door just as it was closing. Inside, he found her in a hushed conversation with Susan and Rick. "You've been keeping up, right?" Evelyn asked, her voice low but commanding. "I need him to believe this place is unsalvageable. We're almost there." Thomas froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Yeah, we're doing our part," Rick replied, sounding bored. "But it's not like he's here all the time to see what's going on. Why not just tell him to sell and get it over with?" Evelyn's tone hardened. "Because Thomas is stubborn. He won't give up unless he feels like it's his decision. That's why this has to look organic. Keep the bad service up, make sure the customers complain, and before Christmas, he'll have no choice but to sell." Susan nodded, her arms crossed. "We've been handling it. But he called a meeting yesterday. I don't think he's buying it." Evelyn frowned, her expression turning cold. "Then handle it better. I don't care what you have to do. Just make sure he doesn't see the truth." "Got it." Rick and Susan nodded. Thomas stood rooted in place, his mind reeling. His wife, the woman he trusted most, was sabotaging his dream. Evelyn turned to leave, and Thomas barely managed to slip back into the main store unnoticed. His hands were shaking, his thoughts racing. Betrayal was one thing, but this was a calculated attack on everything he had worked for. As he left the store that evening, Thomas's disguise felt heavier than ever. He had uncovered the truth, but what he would do next was a question that loomed ominously in his mind. Thomas stood frozen in the dimly lit back room, his disguise now meaningless. Evelyn, Susan, and Rick all turned to him, their expressions shifting from shock to unease. Evelyn's perfectly composed mask cracked just enough for him to see the frustration lurking beneath. "Evelyn." Thomas's voice cut through the tense silence. "What the hell are you doing here?" Evelyn recovered quickly, her posture straightening as she addressed him. "Thomas, what are you doing here dressed like that?" Her tone was calm, almost dismissive, as if she were trying to regain control of the situation. But Thomas wasn't about to let her steer the conversation. "You first," he snapped, crossing his arms and glaring at her. "What is this? What does any of this mean?" Susan stepped forward, her hands raised as if to calm him. "Mr. Carrington, please. It's not what it—" "Don't say a word." Evelyn interrupted sharply, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. Her eyes shot daggers at Susan before she turned back to Thomas. "You want answers? Fine. I'll explain." Thomas's heart pounded in his chest as he waited. His jaw clenched, his eyes boring into Evelyn, daring her to justify what he'd just overheard. Evelyn exhaled deeply, her facade of calm slipping as the weight of the confrontation settled on her. "This store was a mistake, Thomas. A massive, pointless waste of time and money. You're throwing everything away for some childish dream." "Childish dream?" Thomas's voice was incredulous. "This childish dream is the reason I get out of bed in the morning, Evelyn. It's the one thing I've done that's about more than just money. And look where it's gotten you," she retorted, her voice rising. "Bad reviews. Complaints. A staff that doesn't respect you. I thought if you saw how badly this was failing, you'd come to your senses and sell it before it drags you down completely." Thomas stared at her, his mind struggling to process her words. "So let me get this straight," he said slowly, his tone razor-sharp. "You decided to sabotage me? To sabotage the store?" "I did this for us, Thomas," Evelyn said, her voice softening but losing none of its edge. "You don't need this place. We have everything we could ever want. Why waste your time here when we could be enjoying our lives?" "Enjoying our lives?" Thomas's laugh was bitter, hollow. "You think I can enjoy anything knowing that the person I trusted most is actively trying to destroy the one thing I care about? The one thing I built from nothing?" Evelyn's eyes flashed with anger. "You're being dramatic. I'm trying to save you from yourself. This isn't a betrayal, it's a wake-up call. Don't you dare call this a wake-up call." Thomas thundered. His voice echoed in the small room, silencing everyone. "You lied to me. You manipulated my staff. You turned my own store into a joke. And for what? To prove a point." He turned to Rick and Susan, who stood awkwardly to the side, avoiding his gaze. "And you too," he said, his voice cold as ice. "How much did she pay you? What was the price of your loyalty?" Rick shifted uncomfortably, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by unease. "Look, man. We didn't mean for it to go this far." Susan tried to explain, her voice trembling. "She made it sound like it was for your own good, Mr. Carrington. We didn't." "Save it," Thomas interrupted, his hand raised to silence her. "You made your choice." Evelyn stepped forward, her tone turning conciliatory. "Thomas, they were just following orders. If you want to blame someone, blame me. But you need to understand." "No, Evelyn," Thomas cut her off, his voice filled with quiet fury. "The only thing I need to understand is how you could look me in the eye every day while plotting behind my back. You didn't just betray my trust. You betrayed who we are. Who I thought we were." Evelyn opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Thomas let the silence stretch before speaking again. "You think this store is a waste of time. You think I should just give up. Well, here's something you should understand. I don't quit. Not on this store. And certainly not on myself." He turned on his heel and stormed out of the back room, leaving Evelyn, Rick, and Susan behind. His chest heaved with each breath as he pushed through the store, his mind racing. Betrayal was one thing. But this was calculated, deliberate. And now, he had to figure out how to move forward, alone. Thomas spent the night in restless silence. Evelyn had tried to speak to him, her voice low and insistent through the door of his study, but he refused to answer. The words she had spoken in that back room replayed in his mind like a broken record. "You're throwing everything away for some childish dream." Her betrayal felt like a knife twisting in his chest. Every memory of their partnership, every moment of shared trust, now felt tainted by her deception. The next morning, Thomas walked into Christmas delights with a hardened resolve. He wasn't just angry, he was determined. He had spent too long building his dream to let anyone, not even Evelyn, tear it down. His arrival was uncharacteristic. He didn't greet the staff or stop to survey the store as he usually did. Instead, he made his way to the break room, where he had asked the entire team to gather. When he entered, all eyes turned to him. The employees looked tense, unsure of what to expect. But it was Susan and Rick, standing at the back of the room, who seemed the most uneasy. Thomas stood at the front, flanked by a sharply dressed man carrying a briefcase. The man's presence alone added weight to the moment. Thomas began without preamble. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his tone calm but unyielding. "As some of you may know, I've recently discovered a betrayal that has shaken my trust in this team. I won't mince words. This store is my dream, and I will not allow anyone to undermine it." He turned his gaze directly to Susan and Rick, his eyes cold and unforgiving. "Susan, Rick," he said, his voice cutting through the room. "You're fired." A murmur rippled through the rest of the staff. Susan's face went pale, while Rick's eyes darted nervously between Thomas and the lawyer. "Mr. Carrington, please," Susan began, her voice trembling. "I can explain." "I don't want to hear it," Thomas interrupted. "You had your chance to explain yesterday. Instead, you chose to work against me. My lawyer will handle your severance packages. Collect your things and leave immediately." Rick opened his mouth as if to protest but quickly closed it again. The weight of Thomas's anger left no room for excuses. Both of them lowered their heads, their expressions a mixture of shame and resignation, and walked out without another word. Thomas turned back to the remaining staff. The room was silent, the tension almost palpable. "To the rest of you," he said, his tone softening just slightly, "I hope this serves as a reminder of what this store means to me. If you're here to support this vision, you have my trust. But if you're here for anything else, now is the time to leave." The employees nodded, a mix of relief and renewed determination on their faces. Thomas dismissed them, leaving the break room with the lawyer in tow. Later that afternoon, as Thomas stood near the register reviewing inventory logs, he saw Evelyn enter the store. She moved toward him with purpose, her expression a mix of sadness and defiance. "Thomas," she said quietly, but firmly, "can we talk?" He didn't look up from the clipboard in his hands. "There's nothing left to say, Evelyn." "Don't do this," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "You're treating me like I'm some kind of enemy." Thomas set the clipboard down and finally met her gaze. "You treated me like an enemy when you tried to destroy everything I've worked for." Her eyes filled with tears. "I wasn't trying to destroy you. I was trying to protect you, from yourself. From this obsession with a store that's bringing you nothing but stress and failure." "This isn't about the store, Evelyn," he said, his voice quiet but heavy with emotion. "This is about trust. About the person I thought you were, the person I thought we were together. You didn't just go behind my back. You orchestrated a plan to break me. I did it for us," she insisted, her voice desperate. "For our future. Can't you see that?" Thomas shook his head slowly. "The future I wanted was one where I could share my dreams with you. Where I could count on your support, even when things got tough. Instead, you made me feel like a fool. You made me question everything." Evelyn reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "Thomas, please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But I still love you. That hasn't changed." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "Love isn't enough, Evelyn. Not without trust. And right now, I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Her shoulders sagged under the weight of his words. Tears streamed silently down her face, but she didn't argue further. Instead, she turned and walked out of the store, leaving Thomas standing alone. As the door closed behind her, Thomas leaned against the counter, exhaling a shaky breath. The emptiness in his chest felt heavier than ever, but he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't let this defeat him. His dream was still alive, and he was determined to rebuild everything, no matter how many pieces he had to pick up. In the days that followed, Thomas threw himself into restoring Christmas delights. The betrayal he had faced, both personal and professional, still stung, but he refused to let it define him. Instead, it fueled his determination to make the store everything he had envisioned, a place of wonder, warmth, and joy. The first step was a complete overhaul of the staff. Thomas personally interviewed each new hire, looking for individuals who shared his passion for creating magical experiences for customers. He trained them himself, walking them through the store's layout, explaining the importance of attentiveness, and even role-playing customer interactions. "This isn't just a job," he told them during one of the training sessions. "When people walk through these doors, they're looking for more than a product. They're looking for memories. It's our job to give them that." The new team embraced his vision with enthusiasm, and the energy in the store shifted almost immediately. Gone were the curt responses and dismissive attitudes. Now, every customer was greeted with genuine smiles and thoughtful assistance. Thomas also redesigned the store's interior, adding little touches of magic: a train set that wound through the shelves, a wishing tree where children could hang their handwritten holiday dreams, and a small play area where kids could test out some of the toys. Each day, as the store grew busier, Thomas made it a point to be present. He roamed the aisles, chatting with customers and offering his help. The store began to feel alive again, buzzing with the excitement he had always imagined. On Christmas Eve, the transformation was complete. Families filled the store, children's laughter ringing out as they ran from one display to the next. Thomas stood near the entrance, watching the scene unfold. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. As he moved toward the back of the store, he noticed a little girl clutching a teddy bear. Her eyes lit up as she spotted him, and she ran over, holding the bear tightly to her chest. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but clear. Thomas knelt to her level, smiling gently. "Hi there. How can I help you?" The girl hesitated for a moment, then held out the bear. "I just wanted to say thank you for this store. It's my favorite." Thomas blinked, taken aback by her sincerity. "Your favorite?" She nodded enthusiastically. "Every time we come here, it feels like Christmas. Even when it's not Christmas." He felt a lump rise in his throat, but he managed to smile. "That means a lot to me. Thank you for telling me." The girl beamed before running back to her parents, who waved warmly at Thomas. For a moment, he stayed where he was, watching her disappear into the crowd. That small exchange reminded him why he had fought so hard to keep the store alive. It wasn't just about fulfilling his dream, it was about creating something that brought joy to others. Later that evening, after the last customer had left and the store had finally closed, Thomas lingered by the register, taking it all in. The staff had gone home to spend the holiday with their families, leaving him alone with his thoughts. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. It was a text from Evelyn. "Merry Christmas, Thomas. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're finding peace tonight." He stared at the message for a long time. The anger he had felt toward her had dulled, replaced by a complicated mixture of emotions. Love was still there, buried beneath the hurt, but trust would take time. He typed a simple reply: "Merry Christmas, Evelyn." As he put the phone down, his gaze fell on the wishing tree. Among the dozens of colorful paper ornaments hung a single card that caught his eye. He walked over and plucked it from the branches. In a child's handwriting, it read, "I wish this store stays forever." Thomas smiled, a real, unguarded smile. He placed the card back on the tree and turned off the lights, leaving the store bathed in the soft glow of its holiday decorations. For the first time in weeks, he felt ready to move forward. The magic of Christmas had returned, not just to the store, but to his heart. And he knew he'd never let it go again.
If you've made it this far, then subscribe to the channel and leave a comment.